We like to imagine history as a straight, upward line. Stone tools become bronze. Bronze becomes iron. Simple ideas slowly turn into complex machines. Everything gets better, cleaner, smarter, on schedule. But every once in a while, an artifact shows up that completely ignores that script. A precision-cut stone that shouldn't be possible with the tools of its time. A machine that behaves like a computer centuries before computers exist. An engineering solution so efficient it still embarrasses modern designs. Brilliant ideas appeared early. Techniques were mastered, abandoned, rediscovered. Some knowledge survived in books. Some survived in stone, and some only survived as objects, silent, precise, and impossible to fully explain, quietly challenging our assumptions about what people were capable of and when. And once you notice them, it becomes very hard to believe that progress only moves forward. 20. Danala Circular Rock, Alien Mountain, Petroglyphs, Sri Lanka. In a quiet region of Sri Lanka known as the Arwad district, there is a rock surface covered with carvings that continue to attract attention well beyond academic circles. The reason is not what archaeologists have confirmed, but what some believe the site might represent. According to alternative researchers and online researchers, these carvings could be as old as 125,000 years. If that were true, it would place the site far earlier than what science currently accepts for the emergence of symbolic human behavior. The engravings themselves depict a range of recognizable shapes. Observers point to figures that resemble humans and animals, along with arrow-like forms, plant motifs, and a variety of geometric markings. To supporters of the early dating claim, this combination suggests deliberate communication rather than random scratching. Some go further, proposing that the symbols may represent an early form of structured meaning, sometimes described as bind runes or proto-symbolic systems. This is where the mystery deepens. Despite the confidence with which these interpretations are often shared online, there is no peer-reviewed research confirming either the age or symbolic intent of the carvings. No published studies using established dating methods have verified when the engravings were created. There is also no documented excavation data showing a clear archaeological layer associated with the markings. Without this kind of evidence, archaeologists cannot reliably place the site within a known historical timeline. As a result, mainstream archaeology has largely remained silent on the claims. This silence is sometimes interpreted as avoidance, but in reality it reflects how the field operates. Archaeology depends on verifiable data, stratigraphy, tool associations, radiometric dating, and independent review. When claims challenge established timelines by tens of thousands of years, the burden of proof becomes especially high. So far, that burden has not been met. Locally, the site has acquired the nickname Alien Mountain, a name that hints at how easily unanswered questions invite unconventional explanations. Similar patterns appear worldwide. When a site is visually striking but scientifically unresolved, speculation often fills the gap left by limited research. Over time, these interpretations can overshadow the more cautious conclusions supported by evidence. To understand why archaeologists remain skeptical, it helps to compare this site with confirmed discoveries elsewhere. The oldest widely accepted examples of abstract symbolic expression come from South Africa and date to roughly 73,000 years ago. These findings were accepted only after extensive testing, documentation, and peer review. Even then, they significantly reshaped scientific understanding of early human cognition. 19. Underground Church of Saint John Aubeterre-sur-Dronne, France. This is one of those history moments that messes with your sense of what people should have been capable of. In the village of Aubeterre-sur-Dronne, medieval builders didn't build a church the normal way. They didn't stack stones, raise walls, or lift beams into place. Instead, they took a solid cliff of limestone and hollowed the entire thing out. What they left behind was a full-scale cathedral, underground, carved completely by hand. Think about how backwards that is. Every wall, every column, every arch exists because someone removed everything around it. Thousands of tons of rock didn't get added, they got taken away. One mistake, one wrong cut, and gravity would have ended the project instantly. The space inside is enormous. The ceiling rises almost 60 feet above the floor, supported by massive stone columns that were never moved, only shaped. These aren't decorative pillars. They're load-bearing rock that had to be left in exactly the right places or the whole ceiling could have collapsed. And all of this was done in the 12th century, with hand tools, torchlight, and a rough understanding of physics learned through experience. It gets stranger when you look closer. The floor and walls contain around 80 stone sarcophagi carved directly into the rock. This wasn't just a church. It was a burial space, designed to hold the dead as much as the living. There's also a reliquary believed to date back to Roman times, meaning this place may have already been considered sacred long before the cathedral was carved out. Now here's the part that quietly humbles modern confidence. Even today, with power tools, industrial drills, and structural modeling software, most construction companies would think twice about attempting something like this. Excavating a space this large without collapsing it is still dangerous and expensive. Medieval builders did it slowly, deliberately, and permanently. We like to imagine the past as technologically simple and intellectually limited, but sites like this flip that idea on its head. These builders understood stone, weight, and structure at a level that doesn't show up in textbooks. It shows up in results that still exist centuries later. This church isn't loud about what it proves. It just sits there, carved into the earth, quietly reminding us that human capability didn't suddenly appear with modern tools. Sometimes it was already there, working in the dark, carving impossible spaces out of solid rock. 18. Granite box of Elephantine Island, Egypt. There's a granite box sitting on Elephantine Island that really shouldn't be as clean as it is. At first glance, it looks simple, just a rectangular stone box. No decoration. No inscriptions screaming for attention. But once you slow down and actually look at it, the problem becomes obvious. The surfaces are flat, the edges are sharp, the angles are precise, and it was made roughly 4,000 years ago, out of solid granite. Granite is not friendly material. On the Mohs hardness scale, it sits around a 7. Bronze, which ancient Egyptians are believed to have used for stoneworking at the time, tops out around 4 to 4.5. On paper, that shouldn't work. That's like trying to carve glass with aluminum and expecting crisp results. Yet the box exists. Modern stonemasons look at pieces like this and pause. Achieving that level of symmetry and smoothness today usually involves steel tools, diamond abrasives, powered equipment, and careful measurement. The idea that this was done with hand tools alone raises uncomfortable questions, not because it's impossible, but because it's far harder than we instinctively want to admit. The usual explanation points to abrasion, bronze tools paired with quartz-rich sand. The sand does the cutting, the tool just applies pressure and motion. Experimental archaeology has shown this method can shape granite. But can is doing a lot of work here. The process is extremely slow, painfully slow. Every surface would require constant attention, consistent pressure, and an almost obsessive commitment to accuracy. That's where the box starts to feel strange. The interior faces are even, the corners are tight, the geometry holds. That kind of consistency isn't accidental. It suggests repetition, standardization, and a deep understanding of how stone behaves over long periods of work. Any lapse, too much pressure, uneven motion would have left visible errors. There aren't many. And then there's the question no one loves answering. Why put this much effort into this object? The box isn't flashy. It's not monumental, purposeful, almost industrial in its simplicity. Some see it as the result of extreme patience and skill refined over generations. Others wonder whether techniques were used that we haven't fully reconstructed yet. Methods that don't show up clearly in surviving texts or tools. The artifact itself doesn't settle the debate, it just sits there, stubbornly precise. The granite box of Elephantine Island doesn't announce how it was made, it doesn't defend itself, it doesn't offer instructions, it just quietly forces a choice. Either ancient craftsmen achieved results that still strain modern expectations through methods we only partially understand, or there's more to the story that hasn't fully surfaced yet. And that unanswered space is exactly why people keep coming back to look at it. 17. Western Stone, Jerusalem. There's a stone in Western Wall that doesn't just impress people, it makes engineers uncomfortable. It weighs around 300 tons. That's heavier than a fully loaded Boeing 747. It's about 44 feet long, several feet tall, and carved from solid limestone. And it's not sitting on the ground like a monument. It's part of a wall. A wall that's been standing for more than 2,000 years. This block was placed during the reign of Herod the Great, around 20 BCE, as part of the massive expansion of the Temple Mount. And once you really think about what that means, the problem becomes obvious. Moving a couch across your living room with friends is already annoying. Now scale that up by several thousand, and remove forklifts, cranes, hydraulics, paved roads, steel cables, and modern safety gear. Ancient builders had none of that. No engines, no cranes capable of lifting hundreds of tons, no reinforced concrete. Yet this stone was quarried, transported, lifted, and slid into position with absurd accuracy. The gaps between it and neighboring stones are so small you can barely fit a credit card between them. That kind of precision is hard to achieve even today, especially at that scale. What makes this worse, in a fascinating way, is that the stone wasn't just dumped into place. It had to be aligned perfectly so the weight distributed correctly. A tiny error could have caused cracking, instability, or total collapse. And if that happened mid-placement, it wouldn't just ruin the project, it would kill people. Modern engineers still debate how this was done. Some suggest massive earthen ramps. Others propose complex systems of rollers, levers, and counterweights. All of these ideas are plausible in theory. None are easy. None have been fully demonstrated at this exact scale under ancient conditions. And that's the real issue. It's not that the stone proves lost technology or ancient machines we don't know about. It's that the level of planning, coordination, and hands-on experience required doesn't fit neatly into our mental image of the ancient world. We tend to assume old means simple. This stone disagrees. It's been sitting there for over 2 millennia, surviving earthquakes, wars, weather, and constant human presence. Whatever method was used, it worked, and it worked well enough that the structure is still stable today. The stone doesn't explain itself. It just exists. And by doing so, it quietly exposes how much we still don't fully understand about ancient engineering, not because it was magical, but because it was disciplined, precise, and far more capable than we're comfortable admitting. 16. Vihara, Sri Lanka. There are places where history doesn't feel old, it feels deliberate. Vihara is one of those places. Carved directly into a single granite rock face are 4 massive Buddha statues, created in the 12th century. Not assembled, not stacked, not patched together. One rock, 4 figures. The largest stretch is about 46 feet long, and every surface you see exists because someone removed exactly the right amount of stone, and no more. Granite is unforgiving. You don't adjust it later. One bad cut ruins the whole composition. And yet the proportions are calm, balanced, and intentional. Nothing looks rushed. Nothing looks corrected. This was done during the reign of Parakramabahu I, between 1153 and 1186 CE. Number power tools. No laser guides. No measuring devices we'd recognize today. Just chisels, hammers, scaffolding, and judgment. Lots of judgment. What really messes with people isn't the size. It's the control. The standing figures are perfectly vertical. The seated Buddha holds symmetrical posture. And the reclining Buddha, this is where things get uncomfortable. The anatomy isn't symbolic or abstract. The weight distribution makes sense. The shoulders, the legs, the relaxed hand placement, it reads as physically accurate, not stylized. Observed. That kind of realism usually gets credited to Renaissance masters working with marble centuries later. Here, it's carved directly into granite, outdoors, exposed to weather, and it still works. The whole site feels less like something that was built and more like something that was released from the rock. As if the artists knew exactly what was inside before they started. That sounds poetic, but practically speaking, it means they had to visualize the final forms years in advance and commit to them without deviation. And this wasn't a one-off lucky success. It's too consistent, too confident, too clean. Standing there, it's hard not to feel like modern tools didn't so much improve sculpting as they made us forget what extreme patience and long-term mastery can do. Because this wasn't speed, it wasn't efficiency, it was control stretched over time. How exactly that level of precision was planned, transferred, and executed, especially at this scale, still isn't fully clear. The stone doesn't tell you how it was done, it only shows you the result. And once you see it, you're left with an uncomfortable thought. Either human skill once reached heights we quietly underestimate today, or Vihara is the visible tip of something we don't entirely understand yet. The figures don't explain themselves. They just keep watching, carved into living rock, as if waiting for us to catch up. 15. Thousand Eye Bridge, Poyang Lake, China. In 2014, nature did something historians hadn't managed to do for centuries. It pulled the curtain back. A severe drought caused water levels at Poyang Lake to drop far lower than usual. As the lake receded, something unexpected started to appear beneath the surface. A massive stone bridge stretching across the exposed lakebed. Locals call it the Thousand Eye Bridge, and until that moment, it had been almost completely forgotten. This wasn't a small structure. The bridge runs close to 2 miles long and was originally built in 1631 during the Ming Dynasty. Its defining feature is a long series of stone arches, eyes, cut evenly along its length. These weren't decorative. They served a practical purpose, allowing water to pass through during floods while keeping the bridge stable. It's the same basic principle modern civil engineers still rely on when designing bridges and drainage systems. What's strange isn't just how advanced the design was. It's how something this large, complex, and useful could vanish from history. A 2-mile stone bridge doesn't exactly slip through the cracks. Yet for generations it sat underwater, unmarked on maps, rarely mentioned in records, and absent from public memory. Part of the explanation lies in timing. After the bridge was built, the region went through political upheaval, dynastic collapse, and repeated natural disasters. Over time, rising water levels in Poyang Lake submerged the structure entirely. Once it disappeared from view, it slowly disappeared from attention. No one repaired it because no one could see it. No one wrote about it because it no longer seemed relevant. Adding to the intrigue is Poyang Lake's reputation. The area has long been nicknamed China's Bermuda Triangle due to the unusually high number of shipwrecks and unexplained incidents reported there. While many of those stories have natural explanations, shifting sandbanks, sudden weather changes, they add a layer of atmosphere to the idea that something so significant could stay hidden in plain sight. When the bridge re-emerged in 2014, it felt less like a discovery and more like a reminder. History doesn't move in a clean, upward line where each generation builds neatly on the last. Sometimes knowledge gets lost. Sometimes impressive achievements sink, literally, out of view. And sometimes it takes a drought to show us that people centuries ago solved problems we still deal with today. The Thousand Eye Bridge isn't just an engineering feat. It's proof that progress can pause, reverse, or disappear entirely, only to resurface when conditions are right. And if something this large could remain hidden for so long, it raises an uncomfortable question. How many other forgotten achievements are still waiting beneath the surface? 14. Megalithic Wall of Arwad, Syria. There's a small island off the coast of Syria that quietly makes modern engineers uneasy. Not because it's flashy, but because it shouldn't work as well as it does. On Arwad, ancient Phoenician builders constructed a massive megalithic wall sometime in the early 1st millennium BCE. Not 4,000 years ago, as some exaggerated claims suggest, but still ancient enough to raise serious questions. The wall is made of enormous stone blocks fitted together with no mortar at all. None. Just stone on stone, locked so tightly that the structure has stayed standing for thousands of years. And this isn't a wall tucked safely inland. It sits right on the edge of the Mediterranean. Waves, salt water, erosion, earthquakes, warfare, Arwad has seen all of it. The island has been besieged, occupied, rebuilt, and shaken repeatedly. Yet these stones remain in place, aligned with a precision that would still be considered impressive today. The blocks themselves are the real problem. They're huge. The kind of stones that, if you wanted to move them now, would require cranes, transport barges, trained crews, and computer models to make sure nothing goes wrong. The Phoenicians had none of that. Somehow, they quarried these blocks, moved them across open water, and placed them with such accuracy that gravity alone keeps everything locked together. The wall looks almost unreal, like a giant played an impossibly careful game of Jenga and then just walked away. The stones aren't random. Their weight is distributed deliberately. Each block helps pin the others in place. Remove one, and the system fails. Leave it intact, and the wall becomes shockingly resilient. What bothers modern structural analysts isn't that the Phoenicians built something big, it's that they built something correct. Modern engineering relies heavily on reinforced concrete, steel frameworks, and constant maintenance. Many modern structures are designed for decades, not millennia. This wall has outlived empires using nothing but stone, geometry, and experience. Some of the techniques used here are no longer fully understood, not because they were magical, but because they weren't written down in textbooks. They were learned through practice, repetition, and a deep familiarity with materials. The builders knew how stone behaves under stress because they worked with it constantly, not because software told them what would happen. The wall of Arwad separates land from sea, but it also separates two ways of thinking. One depends on machines and calculations. The other depends on judgment, patience, and mastery of physical principles. And the uncomfortable truth is this: the ancient version sometimes lasts longer. The wall doesn't explain itself, it just keeps standing. And every year it does. It quietly reminds us that progress isn't always about adding complexity. Sometimes it's about understanding the basics so well that nothing else is needed. 13. Quarry Marks. This is one of those ancient clues that's hiding in plain sight. And once you notice it, you start seeing it everywhere. Walk through old quarries in Egypt, Peru, Ireland, or even Easter Island, and the rock starts telling the same story. Long, straight rows of holes drilled into solid stone. Even spacing. Clean alignment. Not random damage. Not erosion. These are quarry marks, and their fingerprints. The method behind them is deceptively simple. Workers drilled a line of holes into the rock face. Into each hole, they placed wooden wedges, sometimes paired with stone or metal shims. Then they added water and waited. As the wood absorbed moisture, it expanded. Slowly, steadily, relentlessly. The pressure built until the stone fractured exactly where intended. No explosions, no brute force, just physics doing the work. What makes this unsettling isn't that it works, we know it works. Archaeologists have tested it repeatedly. The breaks are clean, predictable, efficient. What's unsettling is how consistent the method is across the ancient world. Same spacing, same patterns, same understanding of how stone fails under stress. This wasn't casual trial and error. To do this correctly, workers had to understand the stone, how different rock types behave, how far apart the holes should be, how long the wedges needed to expand, and when to stop before ruining the cut. One mistake and the block shattered uselessly, and yet the same technique shows up across continents separated by oceans and thousands of years. At first, that feels like it should mean something dramatic. Lost global knowledge, ancient contact networks, a shared secret. But the marks themselves don't demand that explanation. They suggest something quieter and arguably more impressive. When humans face the same problem long enough, they tend to arrive at the same solution. Stone is strong under compression, but weak under tension. Expanding force beats impact. Let the material break itself instead of fighting it. You don't need equations to learn that. You need patience, observation, and generations willing to refine what works. These quarry marks are evidence of that refinement. They show that ancient stoneworkers weren't guessing. They were applying a method that had already proven itself reliable, repeatable, and efficient. And here's the part people don't love to sit with. Modern stoneworkers still use variations of this exact technique today. So when you see those neat rows of holes carved into ancient bedrock, you're not looking at primitive labor. You're looking at optimized engineering, knowledge encoded directly into stone instead of books. Who figured it out first? How long did it take to perfect? And how much similar knowledge was lost simply because it didn't need to be written down? The quarry marks don't answer those questions. They just keep repeating them, carved into rock all over the world. 12. Ruts of Malta. This is one of those problems that look simple until you actually stop and think about it, and then it refuses to behave. All across Malta, the bedrock is carved with hundreds of parallel grooves cut straight into solid limestone. They're usually called ruts, but that name quietly assumes an answer no one has actually proven. These channels run for miles across the islands, sometimes splitting, sometimes merging, sometimes crossing each other like an ancient traffic nightmare. One of the most famous sites, Misray Getar il Kabir, looks less like random wear and more like a prehistoric transit hub. The ruts here are remarkably consistent, similar width, similar depth, and often spaced the same distance apart. That alone suggests design. Wear patterns usually aren't that neat. Things get weirder when you follow them. Some ruts run perfectly straight for hundreds of yards, as if laid out with surveying tools. Others make clean, deliberate turns. Some climb steep slopes where wheeled carts would struggle or outright fail. And a few don't stop at the shoreline at all. They continue straight into the sea. That last detail is where explanations start to wobble. Sea levels were lower in the past, but not low enough to comfortably explain why functional cart tracks would keep going underwater. If these were roads, why lead them into what would have still been marshy or submerged terrain? Dating doesn't clean things up either. Estimates range from the Neolithic period to medieval times. That's a massive window, thousands of years, and no single era neatly fits all the evidence. Archaeologists have proposed everything from primitive rail systems to quarry transport routes to irrigation channels. Each idea explains some ruts. None explain all of them. The layout adds another layer of discomfort. These don't look improvised. They look planned. The spacing stays consistent even when the terrain changes. That suggests whoever made them wasn't reacting to the rock. They were imposing a system onto it. And then there's the part people tend to gloss over. Malta isn't alone. Similar ruts appear in Sicily, Greece, and Turkey. Not identical everywhere, but close enough to raise eyebrows. Same general shape, same parallel carving, same unanswered questions. This doesn't mean there was some lost Mediterranean super-civilization with standardized highways, but it does suggest that people across the region were solving similar logistical problems and doing it in ways we don't fully understand anymore. That's the uncomfortable takeaway. These ruts aren't fringe artifacts. They're well-documented, studied, photographed, and mapped. And still, no explanation cleanly fits all the evidence. Malta preserves something purposeful, engineered, and persistent, but frustratingly silent about why it exists. It's a reminder that history isn't missing because we haven't looked hard enough. Sometimes it's missing because the people who built things didn't leave us instructions. And stone doesn't explain itself. 11. Ancient Egyptian core drilling. This is one of those details that sounds exaggerated until you actually look at it. At sites like Karnak, there are perfectly circular holes drilled straight through solid granite. Clean edges, uniform diameter. In some cases, the cylindrical core is still there, separated cleanly from the surrounding stone. Granite is one of the hardest materials ancient builders worked with, and even today, it's not something you casually drill without specialized equipment. What makes these holes so unsettling is how they appear to have been made. The marks inside many of them show spiral patterns, as if the drill advanced at a steady, controlled rate. That kind of consistency suggests method, not trial and error. Whoever drilled these holes wasn't guessing, they were following a process. The commonly cited explanation is that ancient Egyptian craftsmen used hollow copper tubes combined with sand and water. The sand, rich in quartz, would have acted as the cutting agent, slowly grinding away the granite as the tube rotated. Over time, possibly days or weeks, the hole would deepen, eventually producing the smooth circular cores we see today. Experimental archaeology has shown that this method can work. Replicas using copper tools and abrasives can produce similar markings. But can work doesn't fully explain the level of precision involved. The spiral grooves on some cores imply consistent pressure and rotation over long periods. Any wobble, uneven force, or lapse in control would have ruined the result. That's where the discomfort sets in. Modern drilling relies on powered equipment and diamond-tipped bits to achieve this level of accuracy. Here, the same outcome appears in stone carved thousands of years ago. Whether it was achieved through extreme patience, a highly refined technique, specialized tools we haven't fully identified, or something else entirely remains an open question. The drill cores function like fingerprints left behind in stone. They don't tell us exactly how the work was done, but they prove it was done. And they show a level of control that doesn't sit easily with our assumptions about ancient capabilities. Some see these holes as the product of slow, methodical craftsmanship pushed to its limits. Others see hints of techniques or knowledge that we haven't fully reconstructed yet. The evidence itself doesn't argue either way. It just sits there, silent, precise, and inconvenient. And that's the part that keeps people coming back to them. Because when you're faced with results this exact, carved into one of the hardest materials available, you're left with a choice. Accept that someone achieved this through means we still struggle to fully replicate, or start wondering whether there's more to the story than we've been told. 10. Golden gilding techniques. This is one of those artifacts that quietly embarrasses modern manufacturing. Inside Sant'Ambrogio in Milan sits a golden altar completed around 850 CE. Nearly 12 centuries later, its surface still looks shockingly intact. The gold hasn't flaked away. It hasn't dulled into a patchy mess. It hasn't worn thin the way modern gold plating usually does after a few decades. And that's the part that doesn't sit right. Today, gold coatings are everywhere. Electronics, jewelry, architecture, but most of them are thin, fragile, and temporary. Even with controlled factories and modern chemistry, gold plating often degrades over time. Yet here's an object made in the early Middle Ages that still holds its finish like it was completed yesterday. The artisans who made it didn't have vacuum chambers, electroplating, or microscopes. What they had were techniques like mercury amalgamation and bowl gilding. In mercury gilding, gold was dissolved into mercury, spread onto a metal surface, and then heated so the mercury evaporated, leaving a bonded layer of gold behind. Dangerous, yes. Effective? Bowl gilding involved applying gold leaf over carefully prepared mineral and clay layers, allowing the gold to bond evenly and flex slightly instead of cracking. When done well, the result wasn't just decorative, it was durable. How durable becomes obvious when modern analysis enters the picture. Microscopic studies of ancient gilded objects show gold layers that are astonishingly thin, sometimes just a few molecules thick, yet evenly distributed and firmly adhered. That level of precision wouldn't look out of place in modern semiconductor fabrication. These methods were so effective that governments noticed. Ancient and medieval laws specifically addressed gilding fraud, imposing penalties on people who used advanced techniques to disguise base metals as solid gold. That only makes sense if the techniques worked well enough to fool experts. What's unsettling is that this level of mastery didn't steadily improve over time. It peaked in certain eras, faded in others, and in some cases, hasn't been meaningfully surpassed. These weren't casual craftsmen experimenting. They were specialists operating at the edge of what their materials allowed. So when you look at the golden altar of Sant'Ambrogio, you're not just seeing religious art. You're seeing the result of metallurgical knowledge so refined that it survived a millennium of air, humidity, handling, and time. How exactly that knowledge was developed, standardized, and transmitted, and why some of it seems sharper than what came later, is still open to interpretation. The gold doesn't explain itself, it just keeps shining. 9. Kofun tombs. Japan's original VIP access. Japan has a version of ancient prestige architecture that feels suspiciously modern. It's shaped like a keyhole, sized like a small city, and reserved for the most powerful people of its time. These are the Kofun burial mounds, built roughly between the 3rd and 7th centuries, and they don't mess around. From the air, they're unmistakable. A perfect circle, fused to a square, surrounded by moats aligned with careful intention. Many of them face the rising sun with a level of precision that feels less accidental and more deliberate. The most famous of them all is Daisenryo Kofun. It's enormous, larger than many modern stadiums. And unlike almost every other major archaeological site on Earth, it's completely off limits. No excavations, no digging, no just a small trench to see what's inside. Why? Because it's officially designated as an imperial tomb. That status turns Daisenryo Kofun into archaeology's ultimate locked door. It's the historical equivalent of a staff-only sign, backed by tradition, law, and cultural reverence. Researchers can measure it, photograph it, scan it from the outside, but what's inside remains untouched. And that's where things get interesting. These tombs weren't just piles of dirt. They were engineered landscapes, carefully layered soil, stone chambers, moats that controlled erosion and access. The geometry stays consistent across regions, suggesting standardized planning rather than improvised construction. Someone decided the shape mattered and enforced it across generations. What's sealed inside Daisenryo Kofun is unknown. Grave goods? Armor? Ritual objects? Multiple burials? We don't know. And that uncertainty isn't due to lost records or lack of interest. It's due to a conscious decision to not look. That's rare. Most ancient secrets disappear because time destroys them. These survive because no one is allowed to touch them. Cultural respect has acted like a preservation vault, arguably more effective than any modern security system. And the irony is hard to miss. In an age where satellites can map the planet in real time and scanners can see through mountains, one of the largest burial structures ever built still gets a pass. Not because we can't investigate it, but because we've agreed not to. So the Kofun remain perfectly shaped, perfectly aligned, perfectly sealed. Whether they contain answers that would reshape our understanding of early Japan, or nothing more than what we already suspect, is still unknown. And for now, that keyhole stays locked. 8. Neanderthal stone circles. Prehistoric project management. For a long time, Neanderthals were treated like the punchline of human evolution. Big brows, rough lives, barely scraping by, no planning, no creativity, just vibes and survival. Then Brunekal Cave quietly blew that entire image apart. Deep inside this cave, far beyond where sunlight ever reaches, researchers found something that shouldn't exist if the old story were true. Circular structures made from broken stalagmites. Not random piles, not collapsed debris, carefully arranged rings and stacks, placed with intention, and the age is the real shock. These structures date to around 176,000 years ago. That's long before modern humans were doing anything remotely similar in Europe, which means the builders weren't Homo sapiens. They were Neanderthals. This wasn't cave decorating. It was construction. The stalagmites were deliberately snapped, sorted by size, and arranged into geometric forms. Some were stacked. Some were laid end to end. Burn marks show that fire was used not just nearby, but inside the cave. Managing fire that deep underground isn't casual behavior. It requires fuel transport, airflow control, and planning ahead. This instantly upgrades Neanderthals, from people who lived in caves to people who engineered environments. Think about what had to happen for this to work. Someone had to decide where to build. Others had to gather materials. Fires had to be maintained. Tasks had to be coordinated. This wasn't one individual messing around in the dark. It was a group project, a structured one. In other words, social organization. And that's the part that really unsettles the old narrative. Complex construction doesn't happen without communication, shared goals, and some form of leadership or agreement. These Neanderthals weren't just reacting to the world, they were shaping it. What the structures were for is still debated. Ritual space? Social gathering point? Symbolic behavior? We don't know. And that uncertainty matters. Because it means Neanderthals were doing things we still don't fully understand, not because they were primitive, but because they were different. The discovery forced researchers to rewrite assumptions fast. Neanderthals weren't intellectually inferior placeholders waiting to be replaced. They were capable planners, builders, and problem solvers, possibly on par with early Homo sapiens in ways that don't show up in bone structure alone. So yeah, less caveman, more prehistoric architecture firm, and if a group of humans 176,000 years ago could coordinate labor, manage fire underground, and build deliberate structures in total darkness, it does make you wonder how much of human capability we've been underestimating. Not just theirs. 7. Garamantes irrigation, desert farming before Tesla. This is one of those ancient solutions that makes modern engineers pause, squint, and quietly nod in respect. About 3,000 years ago, deep in what is now Libya, the Garamantes were pulling off something that sounds borderline unreasonable. They were farming the desert, not near rivers, not seasonally, permanently. Their secret wasn't rain, it was engineering. The Garamantes built vast underground irrigation systems made of vertical shafts connected by gently sloping tunnels. These systems tapped into ancient underground aquifers and guided water for miles beneath the sand, protected from evaporation and heat. Think of it as a prehistoric version of buried infrastructure, quiet, efficient, and invisible from the surface. From above, the desert looks empty. Below it, the Garamantes carved a network that turned dry land into farmland. These tunnels required constant precision, Dig too steep and the water rushes. Too shallow and it stagnates. Miss the aquifer and you've wasted years of labor. And this wasn't a one-off experiment. Entire communities depended on these systems. Crops grew, trade flourished. The Garamantes exchanged goods with Mediterranean civilizations while living in an environment that would kill most modern houseplants in a week. No pumps, no concrete, no machinery. Just planning, geometry, and an almost unreasonable willingness to dig. What makes this uncomfortable is how sustainable it was. The water flowed naturally. The underground design reduced loss. The system worked for centuries. In some cases, remnants of these tunnels, often called fogueras or Granite-style systems, are still visible today. Modern civil engineers recognize the brilliance immediately. The concept is still used in parts of the world right now. Same idea, same physics, same logic, just newer materials. And that raises an awkward point. We tend to think ancient societies survived harsh environments by luck or brute force. The Garamantes didn't. They engineered their way out of the problem. They didn't wait for the desert to be kind, they made it usable. How they located aquifers so reliably, how the knowledge was passed down, and how such large-scale coordination was maintained without written engineering manuals is still debated. The systems themselves don't explain their own origins. They just exist. Silent proof that long before modern technology, people were solving extreme problems with solutions good enough to last generations. And once you accept that, the desert stops looking empty. It starts looking like it remembers things we're still trying to relearn. 6. California's desert petroglyphs, prehistoric social media. Out in the California desert, there's a stretch of land covered in ancient messages, and almost no one is allowed to see them. Spanning roughly 90 square miles, the Coso Rock Art District contains one of the largest concentrations of petroglyphs in North America. Thousands of carvings etched into volcanic rock. Animals, human figures, abstract shapes, geometric patterns that don't come with a legend or translation key. And here's the twist. The site sits inside a restricted military zone near Naval Air Weapons Station China Lake, which means access is tightly controlled. You can't just wander in. No casual tourism, no social media check-ins. It's basically the world's oldest password-protected content, except the password is clearance. The carvings themselves are ancient. Some are several thousand years old, created by indigenous peoples who lived in and around the Coso Range, and they weren't doodling. This took effort. You don't casually carve into volcanic stone unless what you're making matters. The scale alone suggests purpose. These aren't isolated symbols. They form clusters, repeating motifs, variations on the same themes. Bighorn sheep show up constantly. Sometimes realistic, sometimes stylized, sometimes abstracted into shapes that feel symbolic rather than literal. Humans appear too, often interacting with animals or standing apart, oversized, almost emphasized. Then there are the patterns. Lines, shapes that don't obviously represent anything physical. Which is where things get interesting. Because once you move past rock art, what you're really looking at is a visual language. Not alphabetic, not written the way we think of writing, but structured, repeated, intentional. These were messages meant to be seen by others who understood the code. Were they recording hunts, spiritual beliefs, territory, social status, cosmology, all of the above? Archaeologists have theories, but no definitive answers. And that uncertainty is part of the weight of the site. These carvings outlasted the cultures that made them, leaving behind communication without a receiver. It's hard not to compare them to modern social media. Except these status updates survived climate shifts, migrations, and the collapse of entire ways of life. No algorithm, no cloud storage, just stone and time. The irony is sharp. One of the most important archives of human expression in North America is hidden behind fences and regulations, protected not by secrecy but by circumstance. And maybe that's why it's still there. The Coso petroglyphs don't tell us exactly what they mean. They just prove that thousands of years ago, people were thinking symbolically, communicating visually, and leaving messages they believed were worth carving into the earth itself. Whatever they were saying, they clearly expected it to last longer than a trend. 5. The Bocca della Verita. Long before lie detectors, interrogation rooms, or good cop, bad cop, The Romans figured out something far more efficient. Let fear do the work for you. In a small church in Rome called Santa Maria in Cosmedine, there's a marble face known as the Bocca della Verita. It dates to around the 1st century CE and shows a bearded face with a wide-open mouth. Simple, heavy, unmoving, and, according to medieval legend, if you put your hand inside that mouth and told a lie, it would bite it clean off. Now here's the twist. The stone never actually did anything. No mechanism, no trap, no blades. Originally, it was probably just a drain cover, a functional piece of plumbing that somehow got promoted into one of the most effective psychological tools in history. Because once people believed it could judge truth, it didn't need to move. Think about what happens when someone is asked to prove they're telling the truth, with real consequences hanging in the air. Heart rate spikes, hands sweat, muscles tense, breathing changes. Even today, those reactions are measurable. 2,000 years ago, they were visible. So when someone slid their hand into the mouth of truth, everyone watching knew what to look for. Hesitation, nervous laughter, a pause that lasted just a little too long. The stone didn't have to bite. The person usually gave themselves away. That's the genius of it. The Bocca della Verita became famous centuries before mass media, but it truly went global after Roman holiday, when Audrey Hepburn and Gregory Peck turned it into pop culture legend. Suddenly, tourists from around the world lined up to test their honesty, laughing, posing, pretending not to be nervous. But the joke works because there's still a tiny flicker of doubt, and that's the point. The mouth never relied on force, it relied on expectation, on belief, on the uncomfortable truth that humans react physically to fear, even when they know logically that nothing should happen. Compared to torture, it was cleaner. Compared to interrogation, it was faster. And compared to modern techniques, it was shockingly effective for something that's literally just a stone face with a hole in it. Whether it was ever officially used to extract confessions or simply became a cultural pressure tool over time is still debated. But the result is the same. A completely inert object that convinced generations of people to police themselves. No chains, no guards, no violence, just the possibility of consequence. And that's why the Bocca della Verita still works today. Not because it bites liars, but because it makes them believe it might, which, historically speaking, is often all you need. 4. Jacques de Vaucanson's digesting duck. In 1739, long before computers, electricity, or the word robot existed, someone casually broke the timeline. His name was Jacques de Vaucanson. And what he built doesn't sound real until you realize it absolutely was. A life-sized mechanical duck. Not a toy. Not a novelty that just flapped its wings. This thing ate food, appeared to digest it, and then, yes, defecated on command. Welcome to the 18th century. Vaucanson's duck accepted grain, swallowed it, and ran it through a complex internal system of tubes, gears, valves, and chambers before producing waste pellets from the other end. To spectators, it looked like a fully functional digestive process. The reveal came later. The digestion itself was an illusion. The pellets were preloaded in a hidden compartment, but here's the part people miss. That illusion didn't make the machine unimpressive. It made it terrifyingly clever. The duck wasn't simple clockwork. It was biomimicry before anyone had language for it. Hundreds of precisely engineered parts worked together to simulate life. The wings alone contained over 400 moving components. The neck bent naturally. The beak opened and closed with intent. The body responded as if it had internal systems, not just motion. To people at the time, it felt like watching machinery pretend to be alive. And honestly, that hasn't stopped feeling weird. The duck looked like something pulled straight out of a steampunk film, except it existed centuries before that aesthetic even made sense. No microchips, no sensors, no programming. Just mechanical logic, cams, levers, gears, arranged so carefully that the result crossed into the uncanny. What makes this uncomfortable is how familiar the principles still are. Feedback loops, sequential processes, coordinated motion, controlled output. These are the same ideas modern robotics relies on, just implemented with brass, springs, and obsessive craftsmanship. Vaucanson wasn't trying to build a joke. He was exploring whether machines could replicate biological processes, not symbolically, mechanically, step by step, and the duck was only one of his creations. So while modern robotics likes to tell a story that begins with computers in the 20th century, Vaucanson's duck quietly disagrees. It suggests the real leap wasn't digital, it was conceptual. Understanding that lifelike behavior could be broken down, simulated, and reconstructed using pure mechanics. Did the duck truly digest food? No. Did it digest the audience's assumptions about what machines were capable of? Absolutely. And once you've seen something from 1739 convincingly pretend to be alive, it becomes a lot harder to believe that the age of robotics began when we say it did. Sometimes the future shows up early, wearing feathers. 3. Saqqara Bird. There's a small wooden object from ancient Egypt that somehow keeps dragging aviation history into arguments it never signed up for. It's called the Saqqara Bird, and it dates to around 200 BCE. It was found at Saqqara, carved from sycamore wood, and at first glance it looks off. Not wrong exactly, just different enough to make people pause. Unlike most Egyptian bird figures, which usually have curved wings and clearly natural proportions, this one has straight, flat wings and a vertical tail fin. No feathers carved, no dramatic curves, just clean, simple surfaces. To some eyes, it looks less like a bird and more like a glider. And once that thought enters the room, it never really leaves. Over the years, the Saqqara bird has been pulled into claims about ancient flight, lost aeronautical knowledge, and experimental aircraft models built thousands of years before the Wright brothers. Some enthusiasts have even built enlarged replicas and run them through wind tunnels, arguing that the design shows intentional aerodynamic thinking. But here's where things get messy. When researchers applied more rigorous testing, computer-based aerodynamic simulations and stability analysis, the results weren't nearly as exciting. The model showed poor lift characteristics and weak stability. In short, it doesn't fly very well, not without modifications that the original object simply doesn't have. That pushes the conversation back toward a more grounded explanation. The Saqqara bird was likely ceremonial, possibly a toy, possibly a religious symbol associated with birds, the soul, or protective spirits. Ancient Egyptian art was symbolic first, literal second. Not every object was meant to do something in the physical sense. Still, the resemblance nags. The straight wings, the tail, the absence of legs. These features don't match typical Egyptian bird iconography perfectly, and that's what keeps the debate alive. Humans are excellent pattern seekers. Show us something vaguely familiar, and we'll connect it to what we already know. Modern observers see aircraft because aircraft are part of our world. Ancient Egyptians may have seen something entirely different. The Saqqara bird sits right at that uncomfortable intersection, where evidence ends and interpretation begins. It's too strange to ignore, but not strange enough to rewrite history. It invites speculation without fully supporting it. Was it a symbolic object that coincidentally resembles modern flight designs? Was it an experiment that didn't quite work? Or are we projecting modern ideas onto something that was never meant to leave the ground at all? The artifact doesn't answer those questions. It just sits there, small, quiet, and oddly shaped, letting every generation argue about what it almost looks like. And sometimes, that almost is enough to keep a mystery airborne. 2. Astronomical clocks. This is one of those moments where history casually shows you it was running heavier software than we give it credit for. In the mid-1300s, while Europe is usually pictured as mud, candles, and plague, a man named Giovanni Dondi builds something that feels wildly out of place in its own century. It's called the astralium, and describing it as a clock almost feels insulting. This thing was a mechanical model of the universe. Built between 1348 and 1364, the astrarium had 7 separate face panels, driven by 107 precisely engineered gears. It didn't just tell time, it tracked the positions of the known planets, calculated lunar phases, predicted eclipses, and kept track of religious feast days. All of it synchronized, all of it mechanical. No electricity, no electronics, no programming in the modern sense, just gears thinking for you. What makes this harder to dismiss is that Dondi didn't treat it like a magic trick. He documented the entire machine in detail in a text called Tractatus Astrarii. Gear ratios, measurements, Mathematical reasoning, step-by-step logic. This wasn't mysterious knowledge handed down from nowhere. It was deliberate engineering pushed to its absolute limits. The astrarium functioned like a wearable planetarium, a cosmic simulator you could wind by hand. Turn the mechanism and the sky moves. Planets advance at different speeds. The moon cycles realistically. Time becomes computation. And the craftsmanship is where things get uncomfortable. To make this work, Dondi had to manufacture gears with teeth accurate to fractions of a millimeter, by hand, with medieval tools. Modern watchmakers look at reconstructions of the astralium and quietly acknowledge that building it today, without CNC machines or computer modeling, would still be brutal. This wasn't just craftsmanship. It was mechanical miniaturization at a level that feels premature. The astrarium compresses astronomy, mathematics, religion, and timekeeping into a single synchronized system. It doesn't just display information, it processes it. That's why people keep comparing it to computation. Not because it's a computer in the modern sense, but because it behaves like one. Inputs, ratios, predictive output, all embodied in brass and motion. A machine that calculates by turning, and it messes with the clean story we like to tell. That technology crawled slowly until suddenly exploding in the modern era. Devices like the astrarium suggest something messier, peaks of brilliance, techniques that appear, mature, and then quietly disappear when the conditions supporting them vanish. The original astrarium no longer survives. What we know comes from Dondi's documentation and later reconstructions, which makes it even stranger, because the instructions survived, but the machine didn't. So the question lingers. How many other devices like this were built, used, and lost? How many mechanical ideas reached astonishing heights, and then slipped out of history before anyone thought to preserve them? The astralium doesn't just tell time. It quietly suggests that medieval minds weren't waiting for the future to arrive. They were already building it, gear by gear, long before we decided the age of computation had officially begun. 1. The Nimrud Lens. This is one of those artifacts that quietly messes with timelines without ever raising its voice. In the mid-1800s, archaeologists working in ancient Assyrian ruins uncovered a small, unassuming object made of rock crystal. It's now known as the Nimrud Lens, and it dates to around the 8th century BCE, roughly 3,000 years ago. On the surface, it looks simple, just a curved piece of polished crystal, until you realize it works. The lens has been ground and polished with enough precision to provide about 3 times magnification, with a focal length of roughly 12 centimeters. That's not accidental. Natural crystal doesn't just end up shaped like that. The curves are intentional. The surfaces are worked. Someone knew what they were doing, which immediately raises an uncomfortable question. Why does an object with functional optical properties exist centuries before lenses are supposed to? Mainstream archaeology is careful here, and understandably so. The lens could have been used as a basic magnifying glass, or as a fire-starting tool, or even as a decorative inlay meant to catch light rather than focus it. All of those are reasonable explanations, and none of them require rewriting history. But none of them make the optics disappear either, because when tested, the lens behaves like a lens, and that's where speculation starts creeping in. Some researchers have wondered whether objects like this could have helped ancient craftsmen with fine detail work, engraving, jewelry, inscriptions. Others have gone further, suggesting it may have been used to observe the night sky. Ancient Mesopotamian civilizations had remarkably detailed astronomical records, planetary cycles, eclipses, star movements tracked with surprising accuracy. Did they really do all of that with the naked eye alone? No, one can say for sure. There's no surviving telescope, no written manual explaining optical instruments. Just this one object, small, polished, and optically functional, sitting slightly out of place in the historical record. Today, the lens is housed in the British Museum, where it's catalogued, labeled, and carefully described. It's not presented as proof of ancient telescopes or lost science, but it's also not dismissed as a meaningless trinket. It exists in that uncomfortable middle space. The curved surfaces show deliberate craftsmanship. The optical effect is real, and yet, the intended purpose remains unclear. That combination is exactly what keeps the Nimrud Lens interesting. It doesn't scream lost technology. It doesn't demand a radical rewrite of history. It just quietly suggests that ancient craftspeople may have understood, and occasionally applied, principles we like to think arrived much later. Innovation, it turns out, doesn't always follow a straight line. Sometimes it shows up early, sometimes it vanishes, and sometimes it survives as a single piece of crystal, polished just well enough to make us wonder what else might have once existed alongside it.